Much knowledge has been lost due to negligence. Countless traditional recipes, for instance, have been lost, whether in healthcare and traditional medicine or in local Georgian agricultural practices. For one reason or another, a master would pass away and take his knowledge with him. But the Lord did not allow the Georgian nation to be deprived of its most defining and hard-won treasure, our greatest spiritual legacy, Georgian ecclesiastical chanting. And God willed for this knowledge to survive. Thus, in the 19th century, Georgian patriots of that era, both clergy and laymen alike, worked hard to transcribe this knowledge into musical notation. Moreover, the Lord willed that these audio recordings, which, as I have repeatedly pointed out, serve as the only guide for our musical scholarship, enabling us to establish the rules and laws of our musical heritage. This heritage is preserved, of course, in these manuscripts, and particularly in the audio recordings, which truly breathe life into it, helping us uncover this ancient knowledge and document the structural laws inherent within it. After all, within the Church, absolutely nothing happens without order and rules.
Now, turning specifically to the diverse harmonies found in different schools of chanting, here too we find such richness and variety that is truly enviable. Primarily, we have three monastic schools, or rather, three major regional traditions corresponding to different parts of Georgia, namely the Galati school, the so-called Shemokhmedi school, and the examples of the Kartli-Kaketian mode. Each of these three major branches can be further broken down into distinct chanting stages or styles, such as the plain mode, the authentic mode, and the ornamented style.
Let's look at what we actually have today, what has survived by God's grace. In the Gelati school, for instance, all three stages are fully represented. We have the children's style, which features the simplest voice arrangements. We have the authentic mode, which practically serves as the foundation for ornamentation. And we also have the ornamented style, which evolves directly from the authentic mode. Within the ornamented style, we find extraordinary examples of voice arrangement, whether it's voice crossing, mode veiling, special types of cadences, and so forth. So there are three distinct stages. There are also preserved plain voice arrangements from the Shemokhmedi school, very interesting ones, where the second voice follows the first at a fifth, and the bass follows the first voice at an octave. These parallel fifths and octaves are also characteristic of early organum.
I should note that Philemon Karidze wrote that such voice combinations were the earliest forms of polyphony in Georgia. This view, of course, is well-founded, and it clearly appears to be true. These extraordinary forms are perfectly preserved in the chants of the so-called Shemokhmedi school.
If someone asks my personal opinion, I believe the Shemokhmedi school chants also belong to the Gelati school tradition, because as Varlam Simonishvili mentions, plain chanting had been widespread in Guria until the noble family of Tsikitishvili, who had studied in Gelati, introduced the ornamented style there about a century ago. Of course, this remains a subject for further research, but this is my subjective view, and as a scholar, I feel obligated to express it.
Therefore, we have three variants of the Gelati school: plain, authentic, and ornamented. We have two types from the Shemokhmedi school: the plain mode and the ornamented one. And of course, we also have two branches of the Kartli-Kaketian style: the plain Kartli-Kaketian style and the ornamented Kartli-Kaketian style. There is also great diversity here. For instance, when we examine the recordings made by Dmitry Arakshili in Tbilisi, melismatic elements are especially prominent. This contrasts sharply with one of the most venerable representatives of the Kartli-Kaketian branch, the Karbalant style.
where melismas are reduced to a minimum, though they can still be felt, particularly in the cadences.
ნიმუშებში ეს მელიზმატიკა მინიმალურ დონემდეა დაყვანილი, თუმცა ეს რა თქმა უნდა შეიძინება განსაკუთრებით კადენციებში.
Recently, chants belonging to the Garigi school have also been discovered, which is incredibly interesting, and so on and so forth. In short, there are countless examples. And today, when we face the challenge of reviving the oral tradition of learning Georgian chanting, meaning that we shouldn't merely learn it from sheet music, but truly learn to think within the mode, uncovering the rules of voice arrangement and establishing the principles of harmonization within these schools becomes absolutely vital, allowing us to take a mode, a melody, or a first voice part and know exactly how to develop that first voice part according to a specific school's harmonic system, and see how to arrange the second voice and the bass around that first voice according to those specific harmonic principles, and so on and so forth.
სკოლის ჰარმონიის პრინციპით, როგორც პირველი ხმა. და იმ პირველ ხმას ამა თუ იმ სკოლის ჰარმონიის პრინციპში როგორ შეუძღოს მეორე და ბანი და ასე შემდეგ და ასე შემდეგ.
Now, friends, at the end of this book, you'll find one of the finest examples of Georgian church chanting, Angelosi Ghaggadebs. By the way, I would like to say that we actually have many audio recordings of this piece. For instance, we have two variants recorded by Artem, both a plain and an ornamented version. And since Angelosi Ghaggadebs shares the same melody as Shoba Sheni Ukritsnelars, we also have Gigo Erkomashvili's performance of this chant. Consequently, we can observe an incredible amount of diversity across just these three examples of a single melody. As I mentioned earlier, this is very useful for understanding the principles of oral instruction, specifically regarding voice arrangement, melodic development, and ornamentation. So, for anyone who wishes to compare the harmonies found across different schools, an excellent comparative layout is provided here on page 172 of this book, which features Angelosi Ghaggadebs across various schools from the perspective of different mode. And by mode in this case, I mean whether it is plain or ornamented. Therefore, we can now examine this in the book and take a look. For example, the first sample presented is Angelosi Ghaggadebs from the Gelati school. Look, for instance, at how its plain variant is structured. Next is the same first verse from the Shemok Medi school, where the second voice enters at the interval of a second and the bass at the octave. Then the Shemok Medi school's authentic mode is shown. Here we see the principles of voice harmonization very clearly. Next comes the ornamented mode, followed by the Gelati ornamented mode, showing how the second verse progresses, and so on. So each verse is laid out, friends, and it's presented across 5 different variants, the Shemok Medi, Gelati, or Kartli Kaketian. Therefore, this is an excellent example that allows us to clearly observe the differing principles of voice arrangement across various schools, and at the same time, observe, of course, the polyphonic development of each chant, meaning how the principles of ornamentation evolved within Georgian church chanting. Naturally, all of this is presented within a unified canonical space. Throughout, the core structural principles characterizing the verse are carefully preserved. Here, we have the mode, we have the meter, and the principle of syllable distribution. Of course, these 3 most important parameters that define a verse must be maintained. We cannot say that these principles are preserved perfectly across all these manuscripts. Certain discrepancies do exist, and honestly, it's impossible for errors not to have occurred, considering this wasn't written on paper initially.
This knowledge was preserved entirely through memory, and some chants might have been recalled incorrectly, and some errors may also be due to the transcribers. Nevertheless, I reiterate, a verse has its modal sign. It must have its fixed meter, or measure in Georgian, and it must have its principle of syllable distribution. And of course, we must return to the fact that these forms, these polyphonic forms, which of course existed within our vocal performance tradition, are the result of profound musical thinking. Our ancestors conceived and carried out all of this for the glory of God. It is also fascinating to observe the various forms of cadences throughout the development of the voices, so to speak. There are several possible ways to cadence on a given scale degree. For example, if the mode ends on the third degree, meaning, say, the third degree of the upper mode in the first mode combination, when it concludes there, it admits several cadential endings, a unison, a fifth, and a lower unison. For instance, if it ends on the fourth, it's the same scenario. For example, if we are in the F mode, the fourth degree is C, right? If it ends on C, the conclusion could be on a unison, on a fifth, like CF, or on a lower unison. In this case as well, for example, if we look in this book at Dakvalad Jikaroden from the Shemokmedi school, specifically the ending or cadence for in the plain variant, it goes like this. In this instance, the ending variant is like this. This does not violate any canonical rules whatsoever. This is a completely legitimate, well-established, and fully recognized form. There are many such cases, including inserted cadential figures that are not true cadences, but rather musical phrases embedded within the verse. In my subjective opinion, they provide greater expressive possibilities, allowing for deeper emotional intensity and a richer sense of the melody. It is not a cadence, meaning where the verse actually finishes. It is a musical phrase inserted into the verse, which at first glance resembles a cadence, but in reality it isn't a cadence, in the sense that the verse does not end here. It is simply extended using this technique, so to speak, and such techniques are very common in Georgian church chanting. Its expressive possibilities are extraordinarily rich and expansive. That is what I wanted to say. And in this regard, please pay attention to this as well. Just look at how remarkably diverse the possibilities are for both the opening and the conclusion of a verse.